Welcome back to another episode of With a Grain of Salt. I am your host, Isaiah Salter, and today I'm blessed to be in the presence of Dr. Rebecca. Before we get into it, I just want to say I'm truly grateful and excited for this because this is really the first time that we're getting to meet. And so this is really like the first time I've done a podcast with somebody where this is really the first time us really talking in person. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it.
It's great. It's raw.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start with, because I think it's important for people to know who you are, what you do and things like that. I want to start with, what do you do and why?
I love that question. I am a physical therapist. I have a doctorate in physical therapy, and I'm also a yoga instructor. My why started it starts with a story in 2012.
Please.
I was a 20-something, sort of looking for things to be passionate about. I had tried out a couple of different ideas in terms of like career and profession. Knew I was passionate about a lot of different things, but didn't really find something that struck a chord with me. And then as things happen, right, like something happened to me in the sense that I had vertigo kind of at random. One night, in the middle of the night, woke up and was super dizzy.
Wow.
And so what kind of spun off from there was that I then went to physical therapy. I started practicing yoga. Prior to that, I was able to run, lift weights, do all these different things and not feel any physical limitations.
Wow.
So it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I said to myself, what do I want to dedicate my life to? And what ultimately came from there, checking in with myself, going through these different life happenings, is that I wanted to focus on wellness. And not only that, but I wanted to live a life filled with wellness and communicate that through my own life and embody it, helping other people to experience that as well.
Wow.
So helping others to realize that they can heal themselves and the different strategies that they can use to get there. And that's why I do what I do.
Absolutely. Wow. Were you, so this was in your 20s, so prior to that, and tell us a little bit about, your background as far as growing up, because I think childhood is incredibly important into who we become. So give us a little.
I love that. Yeah, I grew up on Long Island.
Wow.
So I grew up going to the beach all the time. Oh my God, I loved it. Right near New York City. So I have like a lot of memories of going into the city and all of that too. We had my maternal grandmother lived with us, Nonna, growing up. So, oh my God, she was like a third parent. I would be a different person if I did not have that connection to my maternal grandmother. She spoke Italian off the boat from Tuscany. So we kind of got to learn the language through her. Lots of home-cooked meals, family vacations and things like that. And both my parents worked in public service. They both worked in hospitals as well. They weren't clinicians, but they worked just with, so the fact that they worked in public hospitals, they worked with people who had less. So I think growing up, we went to, my sisters and I have two sisters, older and younger, so middle child here. But we went to work with my parents quite a bit. And one of the things that showed me was just, I think I have become very comfortable with people at sort of all rungs of the corporate ladder. So my dad was an administrator, so, wore a suit and tie every day to work at the hospital. My mom was a pharmacist. And so, going in and seeing people who looked really different than our family was, and seeing just some different things, which were unusual, and seeing patients sometimes, people walking around in the hospital, and then just again seeing my dad being in this position of a little bit more like power and status in the hospital, and communicating with him and people that he worked with, like I think that there's a familiarity there that I grew up with that others might not have. The other huge piece is, so I went to Binghamton University for my undergraduate. Absolutely loved it there, but always tied to Long Island and everything. I was pre-law at Binghamton University.
Wow.
I studied philosophy, politics, and law. That was my major. I absolutely loved it. I was pre-law, like totally. And then at that time, though, I started to also think about healthcare and was there something else for me kind of in that space. So it's ironic and interesting that then I kind of like made that same turn back into healthcare in my mid-20s. So at that time, pre-law, I stuck through it, and then I worked at a law firm upon graduation in Midtown Manhattan.
Wow.
The place that I was at worked on processing Bernie Madoff's when they were suing him.
That's high up. Yeah, that's some pretty serious stuff. Yeah.
They were suing him, and then they were also suing all the banks.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool, feeling like I'm on the right side of history, so a little bit of that like social justice warrior. And so that really like lit my fire and kind of kept it going in that sense. But I looked around me, and in terms of day-to-day and balance, I saw how the lawyers were living. And I just noticed that. So already, like, there were a couple of hints, I feel like, that were kind of dropped to me along the way that, like, this might not be for you, sitting in a chair for, 80 hours a week, that kind of thing. So I feel so grateful that I followed this path. And I do truly feel like having family support and really just, like, lifelong friends from Long Island and just having a wonderful kind of like home base has changed me for the better, into who I am. So,
that is beautiful.
Thank you. So then I went to physical therapy school up here.
Okay.
So I went to physical therapy school up here. My sister went to ESF, so that's kind of how like I got rooted to here. I visited a lot when I was at Binghamton and just kind of became familiar with Syracuse. And then I stayed after I graduated.
Wow.
So here I am.
There we are.
Yeah.
I want to know what do you think gave you the courage to stop in your tracks and really like make a pivot in your life? Because I think especially it could be a multitude of reasons. A lot of people just they do things for not really understanding why they're doing it and get caught up in stuff like your situation where it's like. And it's weird because you actually did enjoy it. You did enjoy like being in a law firm and stuff. But you started to see things that weren't in line with what you were trying to do. And I want to know, like, where did you get the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to leave this security and then go do something that I haven't been doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember calculating and even, looking at like, how much of a pay cut is this going to be? I wasn't making all that much anyway. So after I worked at the law firm, then I traveled quite a bit. I did a Habitat for Humanity in Southeast Asia and then came back and then worked at a hospital for a year and a half running a blood donor program.
Wow.
So that was in Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. And so that also really opened my eyes. So a couple of different things, again, kind of like leading along the path. One of those things is that I've noticed that taking action for me is better than non-action. My tendency sometimes is to kind of lay out all the options and make a really calculated move. Sometimes that's not always the best thing to do.
Wow, yeah.
So in some ways, laying out a plan, making goals and taking steps toward that plan, that is a strength of mine that I know of, that I'm aware of. At the same time, sometimes life doesn't change unless you change it. So at that time in my life when I was, thinking of my wellness and my well-being and my health as number one, but number two, what was something that I felt strongly enough about that I could truly help people, like what was my purpose, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
And I really do feel like I found my purpose in what I'm doing. I know that will continually change, but everything surrounding wellness and helping other people to realize that they can access that too and how to do it, and that I've been there, that I've kind of been in the trenches, and even since then, we all have low times, and I think I use that as a strength so that I can reach people in a different way to say, like, I've been here, whether I sometimes communicate that to them explicitly or not. Sometimes I'll just hold that space for them. Like when I'm teaching yoga or when I'm with a patient who's experiencing a lot of pain, I might just hold that space, knowing that the container that's there for them, I want them to know they could feel what they need to feel, and that I'm there for them. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not going to deny them that. I'm not going to not affirm it. I'm not going to stop listening. And so those things, I feel like even if I'm not explicitly saying, hey, I've been there. Hey, I've been dizzy too. Hey, I've had emotional pain before as well. I can relate. There's times when it's relevant, but other times when, just really being there, you can kind of use that intuitive sense. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think you gained a deeper sense of self, but also service, love, spirituality when you went to overseas, like to Asia and stuff like that, and like
yes, that was a wild experience. Yeah, it really was. So a huge part of my brand and a lot of what I do, in addition to being a clinician, teaching yoga, creativity kind of is like an overarching umbrella to all of that. And so when I went to Sri Lanka in particular, I saw a lot of elephants in their parades. It was like this moon festival. So there were all these elephants like marching in the streets, and they were all painted and adorned with different things. It was so beautiful. And so really what made me fall in love with that animal in particular, and really I love all animals, but elephants in particular, they're family oriented, they feel emotion, and they're very loyal. And so those are things that I'm like, yep, I can totally, I love that. I relate to that, and they're beautiful creatures. So it changed. One of the things that kind of altered my path there was that I then started painting a lot of elephants, and I actually used my artwork to help to support ending the ivory trade and elephant conservation. I put my artwork on big canvas pieces and have sold those for the last like 8 years in the community.
Amazing. Wow.
And then I also made leggings, and so there's also yoga leggings that are for sale out there too.
Definitely.
The trip to Sri Lanka, I mean, just seeing a part of me, and the reason why I wanted to go, there were some friends and family members at that time who were like, our own country needs assistance. Like, why are you going overseas? And I think a part of me wanted to see a bit of reconciling with my own privilege. And so to a degree, I think I wanted to see, what does a third world country look like? Like, what exactly are we dealing with here? And so I think in that sense, it made me appreciate where I was from, for sure, but it also helped me to understand a little bit more about how to interject humility in my interactions with people. And so that was a big lesson that I took from that. And it's a beautiful country. It's just very different. And so it was really like a wild experience for me.
I can't even imagine. And something that I'm picking up on is just the ability to serve and give back to people.
Definitely.
Is that something that's always been rooted in you, think, since a young child? And
it's funny because I think of my nonna. I mentioned her before. My maternal grandmother. I think of her like my first patient.
Okay.
And I really do think of her that way because my family. I mentioned we were all really close. My parents, my two sisters, and I, and my grandmother. We would go, to the park and do different things, and my parents had camcorders. Back when it was like an enormous huge box that you threw on your shoulder. So they had one of those, and when you look back even over videos from the time when I was really little, my sisters would be running ahead, my parents would be trying to keep up with them and all that stuff, and I was usually walking with my grandma. So my grandma had a cane, and she had multiple hip replacements and had hip dysplasia, so her hips were like one leg shorter than the other. So I found part of it was I really connected with her, for sure, but the other piece was that I felt like I could be more patient than some of my other family members. And so that's something I identified in myself pretty early on. She would do physical therapy exercises after she had her hips replaced. She also had a visual impairment, so she would ask me to look at the paper, whatever it was, what number is that, or which exercise is that, and I would kind of guide her through. I'd say, no, 10 more of these. So I really did feel like I was helping her as a patient
Yep.
from the time when I was really little. And, she was very self-sufficient, very independent as a person. So it was never anything where she was always asking me to do things for her. But it was very much in the sense that it's something I do feel like I was born with, that I just giving back and serving and fills my cup. That's something like I could be super exhausted, but then I go to work with patients and I feel like, a bit of that reward kind of fills you. I help to make this person's day a little bit better. I feel it like in a supercharged way when I teach yoga, because I think because it's multiple people, it's not just one-on-one. So like when I have a group of like 25 people and I'm helping them to kind of get to a place where maybe they started out here and they're a little stressed out and now they're a little bit more being able to leave for the rest of the day or whatever it is, right? Because that stuff also like percolates out into their environments as well.
And when did you get introduced to yoga?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So again, in 2012, like yoga and physical therapy kind of follow parallel paths.
Okay.
So I had, prior to having vertigo and being dizzy, again, that random happenstance that I'm told was just viral. Thankfully, there was nothing else going on. They worked me up for all these different tests because I couldn't even walk. That's how dizzy I was. But I had been going to the gym and doing all these different things. Again, never limited physically, super healthy 25-year-old. And then I ultimately started practicing yoga because one of the physical therapists said, this can help with balance.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of like a touch of it, a taste of it when I was at Binghamton
Okay.
as a student. But I have to say that like I would leave before the relaxation part, which is like where you get into like the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Like I would leave because I thought, well, I've already stretched all I need to stretch and I'm done with the class. What I found after I had vertigo and then I was then practicing, I had like a new understanding of yoga, but also I felt like I was greeting a person for a second time, in a totally new way. So I was like practicing and I would cry during the relaxation time and, was like, where are these tears coming from? I don't even understand any of this. But it was really therapeutic. And so from then I decided that like I want to practice physical therapy and so pursue this path, and I also want to teach yoga. And so I want to help hold that container in that space for people.
And they just coincide.
They just coincided. Yeah.
Wow.
So I've been teaching now for 10 years and I've been practicing for probably like 15 or so. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
And do you think that they cross over as far as like when you're dealing with people who, as far as like a yoga class versus like a patient, do you think some of the things cross over?
100%.
What are some of those
100%.
things?
100%. I mean, so in the community, I do a lot of presentations and, really to share some of the researchy stuff, but also to give a little bit of information for people who are looking for it, like how can yoga realistically benefit someone who has like back pain, for example.
Right.
So I think huge for me is education. And that's a part of service for me, is like sharing that information so that people are aware of how this can benefit, what's in the research. So beyond the researchy side of things, there's also embodiment. And so it helps me to be able to ground myself when I'm practicing with patients, having this practice, having this knowledge. Additionally, depending on the patients who I'm working with, I would say that the grand majority of them I'm working on breath work with.
Wow.
And so having like an innate knowledge of how to breathe, like whether to breathe up into the chest, whether to breathe through the belly, what are the ribs supposed to do when you breathe, what does the diaphragm muscle do. A huge part of the patient caseload that I work with is in pelvic health and pelvic floor muscles, and those also rely on the diaphragm to function best. So yeah, there's so much to it. But a lot of the crossover, I mean, when you think of yoga, you think of things like flexibility, or you think of, oh, I'm so relaxed, or I'm supposed to be relaxed right now, right? And like, just know that like, I ask myself those questions too. I'm like, how come my body won't be still right now? And so I love to give really just like the invitation, frame it as an invitation that like every time someone steps on their mat or they're trying something new or they're trying yoga practice in general, it's all about a curiosity. Because each time that you step on your mat, your body's going to be different, your mindset might be different. It's just a part of being human. So like feeling and knowing those things and going into it saying, I may not know how I feel until I get there. Like that's also a part of it too. Right? So, and sometimes it's like that with teaching, but I can usually ground myself pretty quickly to kind of be in that space where I almost feel like I'm like channeling things through me. I look at it as like, how do I step into my highest self so that I can serve everyone in the room right now, you know, and kind of leave my own things to the side. And it really, like, I can, like I said before, I can be as tired as anything. And I get in front of a class and I'm like, whew, like I'm able to help hold the container and, you know, just really feel it like I'm in a good space too by the end of
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
I love the curiosity part. I think that's huge. I think yoga is very humbling. It's incredibly humbling, especially when I first did it. Like, you think you're a lot more flexible, or you think your body can move in certain ways. They're showing you poses you didn't even know like existed, like different things like that. But I think the biggest thing it also taught me was, like you mentioned it earlier, but patience, but with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I really had to be patient with myself. Like, I used to not be able to sit crisscross applesauce.
Yeah.
Like, little stuff like that. And I used to get so frustrated, but I realized that frustration just created more tension. Yeah. And I wasn't able to just, you know what I mean, let my body be what it was in that moment. So how do you how do you get people to be more curious, if that makes sense? I think people who come to yoga, like, obviously you have an open mind when it comes to yoga, but like just in general, like there's going to be people who are struggling in certain poses or I can't do this or whatever it is. How do you like open people up and create that space where they feel okay not knowing, but also okay sitting with themselves until they figure it out?
I think a big part of it is starting with myself as the leader of the class, feeling comfortable in my own skin and feeling okay about different things. I just made this joke earlier. I was meeting with a group of other clinicians and we were practicing some yoga together just in someone's home. And I said, you know, God forbid yoga should be fun, right? So like I said that more for myself, honestly, than anything else, but it like made everyone laugh. And a part of the reason why I said that was because I think back on, you know, practice evolves and practice changes. I think to a degree, like I'm more drawn in my own personal practice toward like what we would term like classical yoga, in the sense that there are certain poses and there are certain ways to do the poses and you have a certain sequence and you don't really make jokes in class and you focus on your breath so that people can get really tuned inward. That's one way of teaching. That's one way of practicing. You know, but sometimes the temperature of the class is not that. Sometimes people are bringing different things. You know, if I usually do like a check-in in the beginning of class, if there's something heavy that's happened or somebody seems stressed out or a little bit anxious, it's not going to serve them well to necessarily be severe, rigid, or strict. So then I usually will kind of change things and make it a little bit more on that fun side. And some of that has also been like a bit of a reminder for me. So the more comfortable and flexible I am, I found, with my teaching and who I'm teaching to, that has also changed. The other piece is that as I've taught over the years, I've taught to so many different groups, which has been something that like I've absolutely loved. And it hasn't been like I'm teaching the same sequence to like 10 different groups, you know, who might like look different or have different backgrounds or anything like that, or college students versus, you know, geriatric or older populations. What I mean is that different abilities also. So like I've worked a lot with the Fitness Inclusion Network and a group called Mainstream out of the Southwest Community Center. And some of those involve like the participants are individuals that have disabilities, different physical disabilities, different things congenitally, maybe someone was born with, intellectual impairments, cerebral palsy, autism, you name it, kind of different things like that. Sometimes somebody might not have use of their legs or they might have a spinal cord injury. And so I think working with different populations where I really had to like stretch different parts in my brain where I might not have had to before. Now I feel I have the strong skill set in that sense too, because being a physical therapist, I'm familiar with something like spasticity or positioning, or what is reasonable to expect of someone who has not much core engagement. Like, can they lean forward? Maybe not. You don't want them to fall out of their chair, right? If they're in a chair. So different things like that, I feel like, have helped me to become more flexible, and I've looked into different opportunities to try to grow that part of me, rather than teaching at like, and I'm not knocking it, but like, you know, teaching at a studio where you have the same students for 10 years, you know. So I think like that's helped broaden my mindset and also understand a little bit more how to like read a room, in the sense that like I know kind of how to deliver. So, you know, the curiosity piece, you know, that is such a great word. I try to include it in every class.
Okay.
Sometimes I don't.
Okay.
But, you know, I think that tends to resonate with people.
Yeah.
In the sense that if they're experiencing something and they're not sure, am I supposed to be experiencing this or not? I provide offerings. I share that too. I'm here to guide you, rather than this is the pose that you have to do, you know? And so that also changes things as well. So just being careful about my language. We were talking a little bit earlier too, right? About like, do I turn the power up? Do I turn the power down?
Yeah, right. Yep,
in the sense of, am I commanding this pose?
Yeah.
And sometimes there's classes where the pose is, this is the next pose. Bend over, reach toward your toes, lengthen your spine, reach your heart toward your knees. Like sometimes that is the command, and I can say it in a more commandy way. It didn't sound that way, but I can. But then there's other times where you really just want to invite people into their bodies, or just really not say much and just say you're going to reach toward your toes, find your breath.
Yeah.
And that might be all that I'll say for a couple beats, you know, and just leave it with that. So it depends on the class. I took a trauma-informed yoga teacher training recently, and one of the interesting things with that, the person who taught it has done a lot of studies looking at yoga for prisoners and yoga for individuals who are in who have psychiatric histories, and a lot of it is invitational language. If you'd like, you can try to reach toward your toes. If you'd like, you can lengthen out your spine. If it feels good for you right now, you can take a breath in. Or you don't have to. You can sit down if you'd like to instead. Instead of trying to reach toward your toes, you can stand.
Wow.
So just all different ways of teaching. And so I think that's part of what I love, because I can, again, add in that bit of creativity and then reach people where they're at. Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, I love that so much. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Oh, man, that's so good. How important is community to you?
That's a great question too. Depends on what kind of community, but I mean all of it. You know, I think that we are kind of like those ants with our antennas kind of bouncing on one another's. You know, whether we acknowledge it or not. I always think of, because sometimes I do consider myself on the more introverted side of things, although I can kind of be a chameleon in both ends.
Yeah, I definitely
can be a little more extroverted.
Got you.
But then sometimes, you know, my introverted side will kind of, so I don't know, I guess jury's out on that. But in the sense that when I'm doing something like engaging with others, right, I think that there are ways to directly and indirectly engage in community. One of the examples that I love to share and I love to practice is like if I'm feeling like I want to socialize, but I don't want to talk to anybody, I can go to a coffee shop. Because I'm around people. I hear people. People might be having conversations. I feel sort of a little bit of like a low bar socializing, right? Somebody might say, "Are you using this chair?"
Yeah, right.
Or the barista, right, will say like, "Do you want that iced or hot?"
Yep.
Or I'll say, "Thank you so much. I love that new menu item," or not, right? I don't have to say anything at all. If I don't want to, I could just grab my coffee, thank you, and go and sit down. So I look at that as like an indirect, because sometimes my radar will be up there a little bit in terms of, okay, I want to like be around people. I don't want to be alone, but I want to be around people, but I don't necessarily like want to be full on at like, you know, a networking event. So that's another piece of it too. So I think community, like showing up, having your face be seen among others is important. Networks of people, super important. So like in the yoga community, I try to have FaceTime, at least like going to people's classes and things like that, being aware of the other studio owners. If I see them out somewhere, you know, saying hello, introducing myself if I don't know them, making sure that like they know me and I know them. We all are in the same, you know, geographic community, Central New York. So trying to make connections in that way too. So I do think that like, you know, again, some of us are ants that, you know, we can connect with others, but we might not actually want to interface with them. And the other piece, if we look at it through a yoga lens, like there's different what are called koshas. So there's different energy bodies that expand beyond our physical body. So when we think of different energy bodies, it kind of said to go like 6 feet beyond our body. Wow. So like we're interacting with one another, you know, keeping community as something that's sacred is important to me too. So like checking my own energy when I'm around others or when I know I'm going to be around others, knowing what's mine and knowing what's not also becomes important. And being someone who I've really always felt like I could absorb people's stuff pretty quickly. So, you know, it's a little bit of that, like when I practice with patients quite often, or even sometimes in conversations, I'll imagine myself as what works for me is like a pillar of white light only emanating outward. Wow. I've heard before, like, can you put a shield in your pocket and then you tap it when you need it, rooting yourself down into the ground. You know, but I mentioned when we were walking in just earlier, sometimes people's stories, you know, they're looking for you to be an ear to listen. And so I don't want to deny them that. But at the same time, I need to make sure I'm also well to receive it. And so having good grounding strategies where I can keep myself that way so I can show up in community and do so in a way that, you know, feels good and I'm proud of.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think what you just hit on is huge. I think a lot of people, without realizing it, like self-sabotage by trying to overextend themselves and never really give themselves time. I'm trying to listen to this person, help this person, do this. And I'm sure in a field like healthcare, physical therapy, whatever it is, when you're outward facing, like you got to really prioritize giving yourself that time and energy too. So like, what have you seen in your life? How do you prioritize like that balance of filling up your cup to help other people? And then what's the balance of being able to be okay understanding that maybe I can't help you right now? Like, what's that like for you?
So I mean, to answer the latter part of your question first, like I think that I know myself to a degree where I know when I'm exerting myself too much. So if I'm doing that, I know that I'm not going to be as helpful as I want to be to someone. I think that saying no to things has been harder for me more in the past. It's gotten easier over time, but a part of that has also been that I kind of know how to use my energy wisely more than I have before. So there are times where I really do feel like I have so much energy and I don't know how to have it. A part of that comes, and I hear that a lot from people too. People will say, how do you do all these things? A part of it really is what drives me, connecting with other people, feeling like some of the work that I do fills my cup. And so I just feel like that's a little bit of luck in the sense that I feel so rewarded by what I do. Holding the container for people, you know, that can sometimes drain energy for sure. So in that sense, you know, knowing how to kind of find some limitations and what like ways do I need to compartmentalize something, for example. So in terms of teaching yoga, just to use that as a perfect example, about 2 years ago, I started to do just classes as a series or a one-off. So I'll do a workshop or I'll do a one-time event or I'll do a 6-week or 4-week series. And that's really all that I'll do. I won't do a class that's every Tuesday night, you know, year after year after year. And a part of that is because I know that I need a break. I also know that I like to work in terms of like seasons. So meaning that we do something, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. And then we can conclude. So in terms of community, like the prenatal yoga series that I have, there's a great community there. And lots of expecting people have joined series after series, which is great, and they can stay in that community. I think also for them and having like a frame of mind, it's so mentally healthy for everyone to get a sense of, so I sell them as a series so everyone can look around and say, I'm going to be with these people for the next 6 weeks.
Wow.
And that's also really nice too.
Yeah.
Because then you can get a sense of, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to be with these people. They're going to see me on hard days, on easy days. I'm going to be, you know, going through it physically, maybe going through it emotionally. You know, people share stories. It's not only limited to prenatal yoga. I really feel like it's all yoga classes. But at the same time, you know, so compartmentalizing my classes has been one of the things that I use. Another strategy has been checking in with my own energy kind of throughout the day consistently. And then in terms of my own clinical practice, just being mindful of how many patients am I seeing on my caseload, and then how many do I really like have the capacity to see. Many times I will, so in my private practice, I do not participate with insurance. A huge part of that is because I like to put my yoga teacher hat on, which is still in the physical therapy scope of practice, but I'm not limited by insurance or anything like that in any way. So I do feel like I'm able to ask more in-depth questions about how is your sleep exactly? And, you know, what water, you know, are you drinking water? What does your day routine look like? To kind of delve into some of those things that go a little bit beyond physical therapy, but still involve someone's health. So in those ways, I feel like I'm able to get people better faster. So then I can help them. I'm more effective in that sense. And then I don't have to take on, you know, twice the number of patients and that type of thing, because I can help someone, then they're off my schedule, then I see a new patient. And so it kind of works well that way.
Yeah, I love that. The importance of self-love. What is self-love? Because I think that term, a lot of people, you know, love yourself, you gotta love yourself and stuff. But like, a lot of people really don't know how to do that. They really don't know how to love themselves. They don't know how to make time for themselves. You know what I mean? They don't even know what that looks like. So how has your journey been with that? And what is it to you? Like, how do you view that?
Oof. Good question. Heavy one. I mean, not such a heavy one, but a deep one. There's multiple layers. So, I mean, I think of unconditional love, right? That's the number one thing that comes up for me when you say self-love. And what does unconditional love mean? Unconditional love is that you're there for the good days and the bad. You're there for the hard times, which could last weeks, months, years. They're there for the good times too, you know? And so having that love no matter what for yourself, that's really hard. A lot of times self-judgment, you know, can come up and questioning. So in my life, I've struggled with doubting myself. I would say more than anything has really been self-doubt. I've, you know, looking back and reflecting on different things, have realized, you know, elements of self-sabotage, you know, where I've looked at situations or people or, you know, different things that have come up. And I've said to myself, like, I took a situation and, you know, turned it on its head just to see what would happen, or just because it felt different or it felt new or it felt, you know, sometimes I think too good. Right? When you're not comfortable, you're not familiar with things that are stable or steady, you know, that can feel like, whoa. You know, and there have definitely been times where in life, you know, you just want to ruffle some things up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think looking at past, okay, number one is like you can forgive yourself for those things, right? And so I think a lot of times people might have difficulty loving themselves because they're looking at past things that they've done, finding evidence for, well, what about all these things? And I definitely have a tendency for that. You know, let me find the evidence. Let me pull up the file cabinet, so to speak. So living in the moment looks different, first of all, right? So being able to stay in the moment, love yourself in the moment and feel that a bit of that unconditionality that changes things. So, self-love, I feel like that term, that concept talks a big game. It talks a really big game. Not until someone is at their lowest and they're still feeling that love toward themselves. It doesn't mean that in the hardest of circumstances, someone might not feel that love from themselves or might not be able to feel like they're worthy of it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they're not, and so even if it doesn't feel like that in the moment, I feel like I always want everyone to know that they're worthy of love.
Come on.
So why can we not bring that to ourselves? Right? So that's a huge concept. Again, multiple layers.
I love that.
There are so many layers. But if we think of ourselves as somebody who is worth unconditional love, that's huge. And, if we can emanate that, if we can see each other and ourselves through someone's eyes, right? Those koshas that I spoke about, there's one in particular, the Anandamaya kosha, which is the highest self. So it's like a view of omnipotence.
I love that.
So it's like a God view. We're all in that space. We're all have elements of godliness to us.
Yes.
I love the kingdom of heaven is within. Like that to me tracks with all the yoga stuff, and I don't mean to put it like so simply in the sense of the yoga stuff,
right.
But lots of texts that are deep in yoga tradition also share something similar in the sense that we are the answer internally, going inward. That is the answer to so many of these different things. So, loving ourselves talks a big game, but finding that element of unconditional love for ourselves is huge. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I love that. No, I love that stuff. I think you said it earlier too with the forgiving yourself, because I think that was probably I've always been a very loving person, but when I really started going through certain difficulties in my life, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, not knowing who I was, just being lost and confused, and trying to learn how to love myself, I realized it started with me being able to forgive myself for the past decisions, maybe certain things that weren't necessarily my fault, but I took on and internalized it was me. And I wasn't worthy, so that's why those things were done to me. So I think you saying that the forgiveness part is huge, and I think it's just giving yourself grace. You know what I mean? Giving yourself grace and understanding that things happen. We're human. This journey is going to take you in so many different directions and experiences, and you don't have to be perfect. And the things that you've been through and the things that's happened to you isn't necessarily a reflection of who you truly are. They're just experiences that help shape you into the person that you are today. So that forgiveness piece is huge. And I love the unconditional love, because I think that's really the only type of love, when you really figure out what love is.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And I mean, even people in life, friends, family members, you can love them unconditionally. Whether you have a relationship with someone or not, you can love them unconditionally. So one thing that I've used a lot in my life, for example, if a relationship had ended or if a friendship had ended, a relationship of any kind, is using something called metta meditation or loving kindness meditation, which if you're not familiar, metta meditation is using the heart really to reach out and focus with almost using another person as a focal point.
Wow.
It actually came to mind on Saturday because I teach for the Parks Department on Saturday morning, sunrise yoga at Burnett Park.
I got to pull up.
Every Saturday, sunrise yoga.
Yeah.
And there's someone there who every week he's there. He opens up the clubhouse, he opens up the deck, and I don't know his name, but he's there every week. Yeah. And so there are individuals, like you mentioned community before, there are people that we interact with all the time. And we might not have necessarily any, we don't have any feelings one way or the other. I tend to have good feelings toward him because he opens it up. Right. He's always there on time. He's pleasant to be around,
Yep.
you know, but there might be somebody who, you know, I don't know, a clerk who seems to be like getting into arguments, or maybe you have someone, you know, of someone in the media or whatever it is that they tend to rub you the wrong way.
Yeah.
Or you don't think that they're doing the right things. Using meditation, loving kindness meditation, you can send love their way. And so you can do that same thing with somebody who you love that you no longer are in relationship with. And it really feels so good because it is coming from that place of unconditional love. And so sometimes I even use the idea of thinking of someone as a baby or someone as a child, right? Where they're doing the best that they can. They're learning, they're making mistakes, just like us, right?
Yeah.
And so we've all been there. And so I think using those kind of filters and using those practices really helps just keep opening our heart, right? And they say that when our heart breaks, that it makes room for it to open more.
Wow.
And then there's that Japanese proverb that says, you know, the cracks are where the light gets in. Well, I think that actually was... my goodness, that's a singer-songwriter. I'm forgetting his name, but
I know the saying.
But the crack, Leonard Cohen was the one. The crack is where the lights get in. And then the Japanese proverb is that the cracked vases that they would fill with gold. Or silver, right? So they actually became more beautiful. They beautify them even more. So, you know, the more that we open our hearts, the more that our hearts break a little bit, we can open it more and more. And so I think it just allows us to have more empathy for other people.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. Compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
You said it earlier, being able to meet people where they are.
Definitely.
Getting out of your own way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's huge too.
Yeah, getting out of our own way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that probably
understanding
applies.
some shortcomings,
Right,
you know.
yeah.
I mean, I think for one, you know, we were giving props to him before, you know, but Michael Scrow, I mean, the amazing Michael Scrow.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's amazing.
You know, but so many of these things I've grown, and I've discussed a lot of these things with him as well, in terms of coming to terms with our innate behavior and some of the behaviors that we're practicing, and are those behaviors as effective as we want them to be. You know, we can learn so much by doing a bit of an assessment, you know, kind of taking doing an actual assessment, but also you know, using intuition as a bit of an assessment too, and getting an idea of, you know, where we stand in that sense with other people, with circumstances, you know, and changing things up. So one big thing that I've learned over the last year, and I've been working with him for about a year now too, is action. And how important action steps can be, you know, and looking at trying new things out, you know, and so that's been a journey. It's been really exciting, actually. Yeah. Because what is life for than to, like, I mean, life is for service, for sure. And I believe that. And I think for me, a big part is education, service education. Service is being there for people when they need you to be. Life is also about having fun and enjoying it a bit, right? Wow. I was told once by a meditation teacher that life is like a movie, right? Because everything is kind of projected as we experience it around us. And so why not try out some different things? Try out a new scene.
Yeah, right.
Try out a different persona, a new role, right? I attended a trauma conference last January of 2023 with Bessel van der Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps the Score. Wow. And one of the things that he uses with people who have experienced significant trauma and have PTSD, like can't hold down a job, can't, you know, really have close relationships with anybody because they have such severe symptoms, they found that something like theater and getting into another role can help you with PTSD. And so it's like thinking of how to challenge and change our brains. Like, why would it be that someone with PTSD or significant trauma can feel fewer symptoms of trauma when they're acting out in, let's say, like a lead role where they're the protagonist and they have to defeat the enemy, for example, right? Even if it's not violent or something like that, right? Yeah. That changes the brain in the sense that it helps the person to understand, I'm capable of this. Even if I'm playing someone who's doing this, I'm capable of it.
Wow.
So I think that in life too, life's not theater, although maybe people in theater would disagree and they would say,
Right,
yes,
right.
it is. But in theater, you know, and even in life, we can play different roles. We can try different things out. We can switch it up.
Wow.
We can, you know, try a different persona, you know, try a different approach with someone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe someone is always fighting with their partner, or they have a difficult relationship with their friend. Hey, let's try something really fun together.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's not something fun, do you want to switch things up? Do you want to, you know, you take some time alone, do something that means something to you, and I'm going to do the same thing, you know, turn the schedule on its head,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it may be. So, yeah, there's always ways to, like, integrate things in and to get, like, a new flavor out of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel like that takes a lot of self-awareness and vulnerability.
Yeah.
Two things that I think a lot of people struggle with tremendously.
Yeah.
Just the ability, like, to be aware of what's going on, the conditioning, the programming.
Yeah.
Certain things you've experienced or certain things that you have within that maybe you need to let go of. Traumas,
Yeah.
it could be abuse, it could be past experiences. Like,
Yeah.
I think self-awareness is huge. And that's why I got into yoga after I learned about meditation. So meditation helped me to become way more self-aware.
Yeah.
And then bringing that into yoga really helped me tremendously, because growing up, I always viewed yoga as like stretching, and it's just like this.
Oh yeah, me too.
Asian thing where I'm
Right,
like, I'm
right.
not doing
Yeah,
that. That's not
yeah.
me. But it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much deeper than that. And so I think it's taught me so much as far as like being self-aware and being vulnerable too. That's going to a yoga studio for the first time and putting your body in different poses and trying different things. That's a vulnerable experience. So I think those are two things that are incredibly important that you touched on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, being vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable first with yourself. And you have to make it okay to be vulnerable with yourself. If you're not, it's going to be hard for other people to experience that about you, and also to feel vulnerable, feel like it's safe for them to be vulnerable around you.
Wow.
So it's like, until, like I said before, checking with myself before classes. I mean, when I'm around others, you know, I'm checking my energy. I'm checking to make sure, like, is this, when I'm teaching, am I bringing what they need me to bring, kind of thing. You know, but vulnerability is included in that, you know. So I think that, in a sense, we can communicate so much more beyond words, right? And that's another, like, the antennas piece of it. But when we're communicating beyond words, you know, we don't just have to use our words to tell someone something for them to feel safe. We don't have to just say, you can feel safe here. You can be vulnerable. You can just embody vulnerability. Or maybe you share a story about yourself or something, you know, that helps to break walls down. And so I had a friend a couple of years ago tell me that vulnerability is actually a strength. And that just, like, blew the top of my head off. I was like, no. You know, and so I've encountered, like, a lot of different things too. I think from a part of it being from a very strong-willed, like, Italian family growing up, also growing up near New York City, you know, like, you always locked your doors at night, you always locked your car, you know, you didn't smile at people on the street. There's a lot of things that you don't really do. And so, you know, is vulnerability a strength? You know, growing up, I think I definitely thought, you know, no, you only project strength. You're only projecting, I'm strong. And anything that was beyond that was perceived as weakness, you know? And so I think that a lot of that was just, like, archaic stuff that I didn't know was something I needed to reconcile in myself. The more I've leaned into feelings and emotions and communicating them, like, accurately, the more I've really found that it's been easier for me to have that unconditional love relationship with myself, and to also get into truer and more authentic relationships with other people. So I love, again, I'm just going to bring Michael back into
Please,
Michael's
yeah,
scroll,
yeah,
but like
space, yeah.
the leader says the true thing first. And that also is a thread that kind of runs through my mind, not on a reel, but it'll every so often, I think of it like a cloud, every so often a little wisp of it will kind of pass, right? So the more I tap into what is the true thing here, what is true right now, it helps, because then you can kind of create that safe space using words this time for people to feel vulnerable. I've done this in a number of the different groups that I've led. I am in the American Physical Therapy Association, Academy for Pelvic Health. So it's like a subset of the Professional Association of Physical Therapists. Yeah. But I'm chair for a group that looks specifically at reproductive rights. And so looking at the physical therapist's role and all the changes that have happened since the Roe v. Wade Dobbs decision.
Yeah.
So how has healthcare access changed for people? And then how are we going to address that with patients? And so it's been interesting, because the climate in terms of people's thoughts on that decision in the professional physical therapy has been all over the place, in the sense that many were championing the decision, the Dobbs decision, and there were many that were kind of on the other side of the spectrum. Yeah. And then lots of people in between, right? And so understanding a little bit of just kind of like the hot topic that it was, right? We never lose skills that we learn, right? Like when I was in college and I was in classes pre-law, and we were discussing things like affirmative action and abortion and right to the death penalty and the right to assisted suicide and things like that. Very difficult subjects, ethically, morally, hot topics. I was able to bring some of that back in, because I'm comfortable talking about those difficult things. I'm comfortable holding someone else's opinion and view of it, and kind of staying with that, and in a cooperative way, hearing each other out, so to speak. Wow. So I think that also has helped me, kind of bring it back full circle with the vulnerability piece, because I think ultimately I knew that person was right. And I think I knew ultimately that was true. And saying the truest thing first helps to open other people up. And so if you can help open other people's hearts, you're going to help them to get to that place of unconditional love. And we need that.
We really do.
We need that.
Yeah, it's in
community. Yeah.
In every area of life, we need unconditional love.
Yeah.
I think that's that is the thing.
Yeah. You're wait, actually, I think that it is.
Really true unconditional love. It's the thing. And I grew up really religious, Christian. I'm not as religious anymore. I'm more spiritual. But I've opened and, dived deep into different traditions and religions and faiths and things like that. That's a constant, unconditional love. Love yourself, love others, radiate that frequency and energy of love.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we have systems and things in place that just take away from that. You know what I mean? And at the root of it, I think it's us as individuals. We're not doing a good job of really embodying what unconditional love is. And you had mentioned it, especially in the realm of politics or law, whatever it is, you're not going to agree on everything. It's inevitable. But you mentioned it earlier too. We don't have to agree. We don't even have to necessarily have a relationship. But that don't mean I can't still give you unconditional love, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's so, yeah. And not to get too politically, I could get really into politics. But being that I studied political science, one of the most interesting things, and I have a good friend who's in Tennessee right now. She lives in Nashville, and she has converted to Judaism. She's Cuban background. Okay. Her husband is Jewish, and they have 3 children who identify as being Jewish. They were raised that way. And so the reason I mentioned that, they've had a lot of demonstrations for white power and Nazis. So she's been protesting a lot, but she also has met with a lot of lawmakers, and she's doing a lot of TV talk shows and things like that in the area, which is super cool. I mean, I give her a lot of credit. She's got a ton of energy, but she's really fired up about this and passionate about it, and for good reason. And the reason I mentioned that is because it came to mind as I was looking at something that she shared and a clip of her discussing with some radio and television hosts, is that the difference, and there is a little bit of a difference between, if we look at our two-party system, and this is the only thing I'll say about it, but republicanism and democracy, when we look at Democrat and Republican in that way, the focus of each party ideologically is a little bit different, in the sense that in a democratic approach, all voices get heard, all voices assist in making, and that's just like philosophically, you look up in a textbook, what is democracy? Not like America or U.S. democracy or anything like that, but like, what is democracy? Lots of seats at the table, lots of conversation. So when we think of things like unions, people having a voice, workers having a voice, people with more money having a voice, people with less money having a voice, teachers, lawyers having a voice, everybody having a voice. So I just thought of that when she was posting these things, because I thought that is what democracy looks like. And republicanism, again, as just like a philosophical and political science concept, republicanism will really just look for one true answer. And the ultimate answer is less government control. So it's a lot easier to make decisions because everyone agrees on everything. Well, we just want less government control. When I was a student at Binghamton University, we hosted, there was an election year, and I was a resident assistant. So there was, we hosted like a debate between the campus Republican group and the campus Democratic group. Okay, like, let's hear your viewpoints. And I remember mentioning to my international law professor, who was a lawyer herself, practiced intellectual property law, and she lectured on political science, and she half the year was in Turkey and half the year she lived in the U.S. And I remember saying to her just how startling it was, the difference between the Democratic group and the Republican group. A question would be asked, and it took a couple of minutes for the Democratic group to kind of come up with an answer, because everybody had a say and had a voice. The Republican group, quick answer, because that ultimate goal of just ultimate goal of having less government regulation, well, it's very easy that way. So I'm not making any commentary on politics right now, kind of like modern politics, but it is interesting to me just to think about when people are protesting or voicing, it's messy as hell. Like, democracy as a concept is messy, and that's, I think, why it's difficult sometimes for it to take hold and for it to last, because it involves so many voices. Voices don't always agree, and some voices want to just say something, but like you said, that's why I brought it up, don't want to hear the alternate opinion, or don't want to be in a space where people have other viewpoints. So it is interesting to me, you can kind of bring some of those things back in. No skill that we've ever learned, or nothing that we've ever learned ever really leaves us, right? It's always beneficial, I think. And like you mentioned, experiences you go through help us to become who we are and learn a little bit more about ourselves. So back to that curiosity piece, you can think to yourself, I'm curious about, if you see someone protesting in the streets, well, is it the most effective thing to do? I'm not sure, but it's still great that that's able to happen, right? That's another piece too, is in some of these classes that we took, another very hot topic was, someone's right to be able to, if they're a group with hate speech, are they able to still be there to protest whatever they want, to demonstrate? We do live in a society, if we're living in a democracy, really everyone is going to be able to have that voice, because that's what we've signed up for. It's just like with, and you know, I try not to let it irk me, but when people just throw their trash out the window, you know, well, we live in a society where we've kind of agreed that like we're trying not to make our streets filled with garbage. Like, you know, that's a part of it. Yeah. So you've kind of signed up for this, you know, so I think of that a little bit too, right? Yeah. And so even, you know, I am a little bit more on that rule follower side of things, although I'll break the rule if it makes sense. I know what you mean. Yeah, I get what you're saying. But it's like you live in a society. Yeah. You live with other people. And I think some of that to me comes down to unconditional love. Some of that to me comes down to like santosha or contentment. Some of these tenets and concepts from yoga philosophy, which are like treat your environment well, and that includes people, and that includes yourself, you know, and just be around others in a way that you know, want to be. So, you know, there's so much to that. Be the change you want to see. Yeah, exactly. And then I think just for the whole political thing, I think a big thing is something because I'm not really big into politics. That's just not me, because I feel like it's just too much friction. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. But there's a quote. It says, "To know everything is to know nothing." Yeah. And I really try my best to live by that, because it just puts me in a state of curiosity. Yeah. Don't ever feel like you know everything to where like you're not willing to listen to somebody or learn something else or hold space for somebody else's opinions, like you said, you know. You know, they do. It's interesting, just because we do have the election coming up, they do have resources just in terms of education, broader education, resources where, and I loved this in the 2016 election, you could go on, I think it's vote.org, not only register to vote, everyone should be registered to vote, but you can go on and you can say, if you're not sure what really the major issues are, or what people, you know, what a candidate believes or anything like that, or stands for, you can go and there's like little quizzes. And you can, you know, I want to support green energy, or I think that, you know, we're doing okay as we are right now. You know, coal mining, you know, fracking, whatever we need to do, just get the energy. You could check a box, and then you fill out the quiz, and then it says, hey, you align the most with this candidate. Wow. Okay. That's also a kind of cool thing too, because that's a quieter way for someone who doesn't want to like get out there and kind of like grapple with things. And it doesn't tell you which ones are with who. It's no, it doesn't say any anonymous. Of it. Yeah, that's really good. Nope. And then you could see, okay, you know, and maybe it's like 60% of you matches with this, or 40% of you matches with this. That's good. So it's it's kind of interesting just to like see, you know. And I think I did it in 2016, and I think I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah. You know, so I mean, you know, there's resources out there too. So if someone really isn't sure, you know, it's like the kind of joke. It's not a joke, right? But like, it's kind of a joke that in high school, you know, the most popular person wins. Why? Because they, you know, they're everyone knows who they are, right? You know, and that's it. Nah. Doesn't mean whether they want to, you know, let's cut out no more recess for anyone. We're going to do an extra class. Yeah, you know? Right. They might be advocating for that, but people are going to vote for them if they like them. You know, so you can look at some of these issues and things like that if you're not sure. So. Yeah, so that's a good resource. But, you know, back to what we were talking about earlier, you know, I support what you're doing in terms of getting different people in to talk about their stories and to talk about, you know, the importance of community. And it sounds like you're trying to build that here too. Got to. Yeah. Absolutely. Last thing, or last few questions is advice for people who are in the physical therapy space, wanting to get into it, going through the schooling, all that stuff. Like, what's some advice you would give to them in that process, and also what's some things that you can tell people to expect when they get into this field, and things that you really do enjoy and like, and also things that maybe are challenging, and just prepare yourself for? I'm so glad you asked that. I mean, I have to say, like, as much I love being a physical therapist, I feel like physical therapy school, and I mean this in a good way, broke me down. Wow. In a good way. Okay. It was like broke me down to build me back up. Yep, come on. Before I became a physical therapist and before I was in school, I was like, I'm a yoga teacher. I want to bring wellness to my patients. That's all I want to do. I'm going to have my own practice. I'm going to do my own thing. It doesn't matter what standard PT is like. I'm going in this other direction. I'm going to make a different turn. It was really a good lesson in humility for me, in the sense that realized I had to like take a back seat to say like, so this is the advice. This is essentially like open yourself up to what the experience is going to be.
Yeah.
You know, just like with a lot of things in life. But I think I held so steadfast to, I can't lose who I am. I can't lose this part of my identity. And a part of that was that I had gone through that illness. So I like clung so tightly to it. And now I practice in ways that I really didn't think I would, because I incorporate a lot of traditional physical therapy components. Yeah. You know, I'm not just doing lots of embodiment work or helping people to, you know, release trauma through Reiki and things like that I thought I would be doing at this point in my career.
Wow.
So I think that being open is number one. And then the other piece of it, let it teach you what it's going to teach you.
Wow.
You know, you might have this set goal of what you want to get from it, right? And you'll still likely attain that goal, but just let it teach you different things, because it might teach you something you didn't expect.
Wow.
Which, like for me, it taught me a huge dose of humility. And I probably wouldn't be the same person if I hadn't gone through that. So, you know, you think of if a soul is seeking out different experiences in life, and I do think that we have multiple lives, and our soul is like here for, you know, to kind of learn things, you know, and so if we have that as like as a concept, I do feel like it sought that out for me anyway, as that experience. And then the other piece I wanted to mention was imposter syndrome, you know, and thinking of that, because as students are practicing, you know, you have to kind of emulate some of those professionalisms, but also emulate being a professional. And you are a professional when you're a student, but you're not fully in that role yet.
Yeah.
So that can feel a little bit like confusing, because you're like, well, one day I'm in charge of this person's plan of care, and the next day my instructor is telling me I need to do it a different way. Right? So like you can kind of go back and forth with that. You have to be really flexible. But it is ultimately a tremendously rewarding career.
Yeah.
And I feel lucky every day that I get to spend so much time with people and not only hear their stories, because wow, I mean, people will share deep things with you too.
It's a wrap.
Like, I've never told anybody this, you know, but, you know, and then just being able to help them acquaint to their bodies. And you don't reach everybody,
right?
You know, and, you know, sometimes it takes the seventh person that they work with. And I think also being okay with that too. So if you're like new in the field and you're like, I'm not reaching anybody, nobody's getting any better.
I was gonna say that.
You might be the first voice in 15 voices that needs to tell them the same thing about try to cut out soda, you know, whatever it may be. And, you know, but just know that that's your part in it. And hey, you know, make some peace with it if you can.
Don't be discouraged. It's part of the process.
Don't be discouraged.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
So we're going to finish the episode with our final 3 questions.
Cool.
What is the best advice you've ever heard or received? Ever.
Oh my God, I love that. Can it be a quote? Yeah, it can be a quote. Okay, Herman Hesse. I love this. You're not going in circles. You're going upwards. The path is a spiral, and you've already climbed many steps. So even if you feel like you've encountered something again, right? It's like if you're in a building, you're going up, you see a tree, you're on the first floor. You go up a flight, you see the same tree. It's from a different vantage point, but you still see the tree. It would be a cognitive error to think that, okay, I must be on the same floor again. No, not necessarily. Either that or maybe the tree is growing too, right?
Beautiful.
So when we pass similar circumstances, that for me has been hugely powerful, because I might think that I'm in the same spot, but hey, even if you're in a similar spot, you've grown and learned, and you're a different person than the last time you were there. So you're going to make different choices, or you have the option to make different choices. So that's what was there for you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, on the contrary, what's the worst advice you've ever heard or received?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question. I'm thinking about this one for a moment.
Take your time.
Yeah. You know, I do feel like I've accumulated advice over time. This almost might be the best and the worst advice kind of combined into one.
Right, a little paradox.
To stick with something. just because you started that path.
Mm.
Best and worst advice, because sometimes you got to make a change. Worst advice because, worst advice because sometimes you have to make a change. Best advice because sometimes you need to follow something through to really understand the beauty or the benefit of it at the end.
Wow.
So I take it as some of the worst advice I've gotten because there have been things that I knew weren't right for me to stick with. And I stuck with it. And in some ways, maybe I wouldn't have felt as confident or comfortable with the decision that I ultimately made if I hadn't stuck with it, because then I really knew by the time I got to that breaking point.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, maybe you can make different choices, move on faster.
Wow.
So, and that goes for a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
It's beautiful. And then the last question is, if you could create one law or rule that everybody in the world had to follow, what would it be and why?
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
I think that anyone who wants to get a hug should be able to get a hug. Anyone who needs like physicality, and I mean in a platonic sense, but anyone who needs a hug, because that is, it's a need. So a lot of people have pets, right? And like pets serve that. But, not everyone has that. So I really do think that,
beautiful.
People shouldn't be forced to hug. That's not a thing.
Right.
But if someone needs a hug, they should be able to wear a T-shirt that says, I need a hug today.
And you can get one.
And someone can give them a hug, as long as it's consensual, right?
Absolutely,
Like, I don't want a hug from you, but I'll take a hug from you.
Yes, absolutely. That's
beautiful.
So,
yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
And then now you could tell the viewers a little bit about like where they can find you, but also you can finish off by saying just the importance and the benefits that you think yoga can bring into somebody's life. I forgot to ask you that, but I think it really is a beautiful practice.
Yeah.
So just give people some of the benefits outside of the stretching and like moving your body
100%,
and stuff. But
100%. Oh, there's so much to it. I could say so many. Would you like me to face the
camera
while I tell you?
Yeah, it's fine.
So for one, cognitive mental health benefits and all that. So like people sleep better. Mm-hmm. People can think better. They have more clarity. Your brain actually changes in lots of ways, similar to how it changes with meditation. But in particular, there's a neurotransmitter called GABA, which is present in the brain during like pleasure-filled activities.
Okay.
So like being around loved ones and doing things with friends and having fun and more of that like play time. But yoga also can contribute to that too. So it actually changes our mood and our disposition. And so it takes about 1 week for GABA to deplete after you've done a yoga class, because we know that it increases.
Wow.
It also decreases cortisol in the body. So that's a stress hormone secreted by the adrenals. And the adrenals are like, some people have adrenal fatigue, and different things like that, where they're like, their body's pumping out so much adrenaline and cortisol because it's trying to keep them going. They're running themselves ragged. We talked about energy before, energy conservation and management. So that's one in the brain. And then the other piece is it changes your connective tissue. So it actually changed your connective tissue to make it from kind of like a rougher, thicker to very flat and very organized.
Wow.
In the sense that it makes it longer. And so that's where some of the flexibility piece comes into play. So that helps people age better. People can get a little bit taller, believe it or not.
Wow. Fix their posture.
Yeah, exactly. Fixing posture. And so if somebody is like really stiff, let's say in their neck or their upper back or something like that, it helps to elongate those connective tissues. So it can help with that. People breathe better.
Yeah.
But like the main things, you take more care of your body when you're aware of the intention of these movements. And then ultimately, like my absolute favorite is the changes to the nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, we have the central, which is the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is kind of like, I think of it as like solar plexus chakra, and that's scanning the body, scanning the environment. What's around the body? Is anything going to hurt me? Is anything going to help me? Is this safe? Is this not safe? Anywhere in between. And so scanning our body, we have more feelings of being in a space of safety. We have more, less reactivity, like to stimulation, in the sense of like bright lights, flashing, someone becoming irritable from that. That's like a highly sensitive nervous system. So like when people have brain injuries or concussion or something like that, or they're just anxious in general, their body's firing on all cylinders.
Wow.
They're super stressed out,
Wow.
right? And so yoga can help to dampen some of that, to change things. So that can be beneficial.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And then I'd love to share about my practice also.
Yes.
So,
and
to look into the, okay.
If you want to look at the camera, no, look at the camera.
Either
Go ahead,
way.
do your thing. Yeah.
So, I'm Dr. Rebecca Alexander Carey, a physical therapist, yoga instructor, wellness advocate, and I practice and founded Terra Physical Therapy Wellness, PLLC. You can find my practice by visiting terraphysicaltherapy.com. You can also find my business page and find me on Instagram as well as Dr. Rebecca DPT
I'm gonna put all that in the description too.
Perfect. And then I also I offer lots of yoga classes. I do self-care lectures, lectures about pelvic health, lots of education in the community about this.
Wow.
And so if you're interested in having me come and speak to your group or you about wellness and how to bring more of that, grounding strategies, things that you can implement either in your business or in your community, let me know.
Please, yes. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for this.
you.
We're definitely going to have you on again.
Oh, I love that.
Because there's so many other questions and topics I want to get into. But
I know.
Appreciate you coming out so much. It's a pleasure, and your story and your perspective is amazing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.